And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, as always, is my good brother here in the temple, the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadaria Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
The Dari Enterprises would like to remind you that no matter how many guns we make and what they look like, none of them will look as cursed as the discovery we've made today.
Or any gun from Khyber Pass.
That too. They may be as crack cocaine inspired as anything from Keltec, though. So your mileage may vary. However, our guns will always function. That is a guarantee.
Which makes because you're not taking cues from High Point.
We haven't bought them yet? Oh no, wait, that's right. I told them they weren't allowed to buy them because, frankly, that would drag the brand down.
Yeah, it's a case of you need to have somebody who's actually interested in order to get somebody to buy. But
well, I think of it more as Zadaria Enterprises has standards. God damn it! Be that as it may, that's a bit rails.
Yeah. So getting back on the rails, we are music nerds as much as anybody else. In fact, which I realize is a bit redundant because we dip our toes into a lot of ponds. And are the better for it because, well, who wants to be a one-trick pony?
I can think of a couple people. Todd Howard being on top of that list.
I love how that's an evergreen joke because it will always ring true.
I mean, it just works, Monk.
But we've had our discussions regarding various musics. We've shared some absolute bangers in the server, but we've also talked about the interesting history with certain albums and certain changes. And given that for the past 2 months we've had this thing of just burying the nostalgic mindset or the mindset of expectations, the design by gospel as we've talked about it. One might think that design by gospel is limited to just gaming. No, it is not. Music can be just as much of a victim of it as anything else. And that brings us to the subject matter: real music, an exercise in irony. Because aside from the fact that you have the hipster issues where people talk way too much about what is real music to the point where I've made a parody of it, you also have certain albums and the like that nowadays are treated as masterpieces, but when they came out, people outright hated it. And the big one, and I specific is, and this was one of the four that I specifically asked to have in the splash image, is "The Shape of Punk to Come" by Refused.
Which,
And
as everybody knows, we've mentioned countless times at this point in the discussions regarding things like Design by Gospel.
but we've never I don't think we've gone all in on why we use that particular album as an example of this Design by Gospel problem. So I think I think it's time for you to be the evangelist and go into this particular album and why it was controversial and why we use it as a perfect example of this kind of thing.
Okay. So I know I went into it in a little detail back in our non-dystopian cyberpunk episode. Again, things that are hated now that will be loved in the future. I can see it already. But The Shape of Punk to Come is essentially one of the biggest experimental albums having to do with the punk genre of music ever made, possibly the biggest. Every song is something different, and when people think punk, and I can already hear it from some people, they have a very specific sound space in their mind. Because punk rock was such a thing for such a long time. But the entire point of punk as a genre is you aren't following what is popular. You aren't following what is mainstream. You aren't following, and not just because it's mainstream or popular, but because you truly want to create something unique. And you want to go against the status quo to try and shake things up for the better. That's what punk was always supposed to be. It's supposed to be a way to examine your own uniqueness and everybody else's and share. You're sharing what makes you with other people in the hopes that maybe they can glean something for themselves from themselves. So The Shape of Punk to Come was this huge project. Everything, it's fantastic music. We've always said, go listen to this album. But you've got so many different inspirations mixed in, and for people going in expecting what they've always expected of punk, they didn't get what they were expecting at all. This wasn't the punk rock that they thought they were getting.
Yeah.
There's jazz-inspired punk songs in here. There's electronic-inspired punk songs. It runs the gamut. It's all over, and it's all really well done. But because people didn't get punk, or what they think is punk, it was very poorly received in the actual release.
To the point, it was. I know it might be tempting to say, a few music snobs didn't want to review it. No, even among punk magazines that focus on this particular area, they would outright refuse to review it.
Mm-hmm.
And largely due to it having a bunch of different instruments and a bunch of different musical styles. I should note the full title is, as you can see, the Shape of Punk to Come, a chemical abomination in
12 bursts.
Yeah, 12 bursts. And this is always the big one that I go to, because there was a certain contradiction in the, as you mentioned, the ethos of punk about being about that kind of self-expression. Yet a lot of people within the punk scene rejected this project for not being this idea of punk that began and ended with punk rock. And where this ties into, to tie it back into what we were doing when it came to the non-dystopian cyberpunk, that was born out of the idea of whether or not you need to have a dystopia, or if that's something we've talked ourselves into because of the cyberpunk works of the 1980s.
Mhm.
And in fact, I ended up revisiting the concept because I came to realize how stagnant the cyberpunk genre is when it comes to tabletop role-playing games, and I'd say gaming as a whole.
Yes, cyberpunk as a genre, when it comes to gaming, um, really has just become that one note in so many ways.
Hmm.
There are outliers. We've found them. We've looked at them. Um, I mean, even one of the couple of the Valley of the Judged one shots we've done have been some really cool, different takes that don't follow the same mega corporation future dystopia. What would you call that? Pastiche. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
That were that are very familiar for much of cyberpunk.
Hmm.
But as I pointed out there, and as I'm pointing out here, punk is all about expressing your unique self, and shaking up the status quo. Like, the big thing about punk is that it's evolutionary. It's trying to change things. And not necessarily just for the sake of change. We've discussed how, on the flip side of design by gospel, is the rejection of everything by gospel simply because you don't want to be like everything. Both are extremes. Both tend to lead to worse products. But in the case of punk, it is, I have this thing inside me that I want to express, and I don't care if the status quo likes it or not. This is me, here it is. And if that shakes up the status quo and allows other people to come out with their own ideas and share those ideas, that's punk. That's punk.
Yeah. And I suppose when this is the reason why I found that little trinity of cyberpunk kickstarters that we had in the spring to be an interesting set of coincidences.
Mm-hmm.
And those three ended up getting covered on Forbes. That being Sinless, which feels like a simplified throwback to earlier edition. I'd say second edition Shadowrun.
Mm-hmm.
Vault, which I've talked about at great length, and mentioned it as a case on how you can actually do hacking mechanics that don't feel overwrought.
Mm-hmm.
And Subversion, which is the really interesting one, where it is taking the typical concept of cyberpunk fantasy that people have seen since Shadowrun and flipping it on its head.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is also the reason why one of my favorite post-apocalypse games, which I mentioned that as another stagnant entry because how many times can you dress up a zombie apocalypse, is Degenesis. Mostly because Degenesis is not a zombie apocalypse. it is it is a Morlocks on steroids kind of situation, I guess, is the best way for me to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not dealing with zombies or anything like that. That's not the main threat. The main threat are these hyper evolved mutations, creating a new subspecies in Homo degenesis. And that is it. The reason why I speak so highly of it is because of the fact that it's introducing a different approach. I won't whether it's an original approach. That's beyond the scope of this. It's that it's doing something that isn't what you're expected to do when it comes to when it comes to the post-apocalypse. Most people have this idea that you have to be dealing with either a zombie apocalypse or a post-nuclear apocalypse, a la Mad Max and Fallout.
Hmm.
Which you can certainly do that, but the idea that you should be limited to that is a bit of a stretch. But since we mentioned the personal, this is as good a time as any for me to talk about Pinkerton. Now, I'm not going to claim to be to be the biggest fan of Weezer, and I got real sick of Beverly Hills real quick.
Hmm.
But Pinkerton was Weezer's second album, and it was essentially their plan B because originally they were thinking of doing a rock opera called Songs from the Black Hole, which admittedly wanting to do a rock opera on your second album might be a bit of eyes bigger than your stomach.
Hmm.
And that particular project has remained unfinished to this day. But the but the thing of it is, Pinkerton it was not exactly doing the pop rock approach that their self-titled album was doing back in I want to see in '94.
Hmm.
You know, where it's where it seemed like they were going to be doing the color theme, which they would do for later albums, where you get stuff like the red, white, teal, and black album.
Hmm.
Uh, but the it was a much darker tone, a much personal tone, one that was him having this abrasive take on the rock lifestyle. When it came out in '96, it fucking tanked. It tanked. Um, Matt Sharp, the original bassist, and ended up leaving sometime afterwards, and it it did not make any sales expectations. It debuted at number 19 on the Billboard 200,
Hmm.
which was certainly a step down for them. And it's but for whatever reason, in the years since, all of a sudden, it's a masterpiece. It's one of the best albums of all time, and all of that.
Things changed for some reason.
Hmm. I suppose if I had to make an analogy, consider the reception that happened over the years with Metal Gear Solid 2.
Hmm.
And I know it'd be tempting. I know it'd be tempting to say, well, of course, after A Vengeance, people turned around on Raiden. No, this happened before that. There is obviously the effect that time and a degree of separation can have,
Hmm.
but I think moreover it's an issue of expectations.
Hmm.
And I know some people might say, isn't that what people were saying about a certain FF that you guys have been calling out the grogs about? Yes and no. This is more about the idea that there's a bit of a dilemma when it comes to doing creative endeavors, especially creative endeavors that are supposed to be a commercial thing, where if you build your particular brand within a certain style, but you want to venture out of it for one reason or another, how do you do it? With a well, it's a case of having to essentially balance two things on a seesaw.
Yeah, and I mean, I can point out, and I know I'm probably going to get some shit for this, just because people seem to have, even to this day, a mixed view. There are bands who have made that. They basically do a different sound every major album, and the band that first comes to mind with that is Linkin Park. Yes, we had the albums with things like remixes or extra editions in between, but the changes from Hybrid Theory to Meteora to A Thousand Suns, etc., it's a different sound each time. And they never really stuck to just one genre.
It would be very easy to do that, but on the other hand, if you end up doing that too much, you can have a situation like, say, Manowar.
Mm-hmm.
Now, don't get me wrong, I love Manowar, but I also can't deny that they've been making the same 10 songs for almost 30 years.
And once you've heard the 10 songs the first time around, you've heard them every time around.
And if I have to use a bit more weeb of an example, why is the name escaping me? The composer has been working on games in the Tales series for over a decade at least. I believe it was Sakuraba.
Might be. I'd have to look it up. Well, you know, that's another place to actually pull a very good weeb example of someone who never stood in one genre, with probably the most recognizable composer name in all of the world when it comes to weeb stuff, Nobuo Uematsu.
Uematsu has experimented quite a bit.
Yeah, he never really sticks with the same thing ever.
Like, the closest thing that you could say that he stuck to over the years were certain leitmotifs, like the Victory Fanfare or the Crystal theme. But
yeah, but that's different though. That's associated with the properties he was working on. Mm-hmm. I don't think I need to point at 6 through 9 to show everybody the vast differences in the way Uematsu composed over that time period.
Yeah. Especially 9. Nine's a lot of the music, and obviously trying to nail down a particular theme with music from any video game is going to be tricky, and especially with RPGs because of the sheer volume of content.
I will point out that 9 is probably one of the most ingenious OSTs for Final Fantasy, as to how it based everything around like 7 leitmotifs, and then everything except for one song was built off of that, and that one song is You're Not Alone. It's the only song that isn't involved with any leitmotif in the game ever. It only pops up once to punctuate possibly the most emotional part of Zidane's journey. And it is also my favorite song from the OST. Mm-hmm. And if anybody else wants to get on my case about that, fuck you, fight me.
Yeah, but and then even most people would think that something like Otherworld in 10 would be beneath him, but no. And I look at that as more of a recognition that people were starting to do metal remixes of his previous work. Thor especially got a lot of that treatment.
Well, then people also forget that, you know, before Distant Worlds orchestra tours, or
You're bringing up the Black Mages, aren't you?
you bet your ass I'm bringing up his fucking rock band.
Mm-hmm.
the Black Mages was the first. The first of incarnation of his personal bands associated with Square songs, and then after they stopped doing that, they started touring with most of the same members in the Earthbound Papas.
Mm-hmm. And on the this is as incidentally that whole balancing act between doing what you want to do and doing expectations is one of the big reasons why I keep telling content creators this, unless you're to not play divisive games with politics, because it is all you're going to do is just kill off your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Because I came to that conclusion when I started seeing the trend of certain people diving into divisive politics and becoming assholes.
Politics does that to people.
And in a lot of those cases, they had built their platform on something that was not related to politics at all. Then they dove into that, and that wasn't what people had come to that particular platform to discuss.
Yep. That's once again the whole balancing expectations thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
if I think that if as long as there's a proper build to it, if there's a shift in style, then people are going to go along with it. There will be some who will act like you're selling out, though. Though those people are in the same category as grogs. And another music example I will use when it comes to a major shift is everything that Opeth has done since Heritage.
Yep.
Opeth in their earliest days started out as a very, I'd say more black metal than, I know some people say doom. I'd say more black metal than that. They weren't aggressive. They weren't the same style of aggressive as, say, death metal.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there is a difference. There is a massive difference between doom, death, and black metal. But from Heritage onward, they shifted into a progressive doom style.
Yes.
Something not far removed from, say, Ghost.
Yeah. Although Ghost is, I would say Ghost is a little light to fully call it metal, but it's Ghost. We all love Ghost around here.
Yeah.
And of course, with Opeth, the change was not unwelcome. I mean, Opeth, I don't think I really need to sing their praises. They can sing their own praises. Haha. But their musical quality has always been high, and the shift in genres just added for a new soundscape for people to really dive into. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if Opeth was just whether they did it for, hey, we want to get new audience, or whether they were just getting tired of doing the same genre. I imagine it's probably a little bit of both.
Well, let me look at the chronology to see. So Opeth started all the way back in 1990.
Yep.
And Deliverance, actually not Deliverance. That's not the one I'm looking for. Heritage was in 2011.
Yeah, so they'd been doing the same. They'd been staying in their genre bubble for 21 years at that point.
Mm-hmm.
or 20 years. It takes some time to develop a studio album, guys. I'm not sure if you all knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they probably were like, we've been in this bubble for a while. It's kind of comfy. Let's see if we can do things that are cool and different.
Yeah. And actually, I do apologize because I'm gonna fuck up pronunciation, but in my defense, Swedish. Ackerfeld had spoken about why they departed from the sound that they had built for 20 years, saying, quote, "I was discouraged with the contemporary metal scene, and I wanted to break away from it even more. I felt like we'd been on the outskirts of that scene for a couple of years. I just couldn't see myself writing another album in the same vein as the last couple of records. Thankfully, I listened to so many different kinds of music, and writing music has never been a problem. I've always seen Opeth as a band without boundaries. So if it's good and everybody in the band likes it, it's an Opeth record. In the end, I sat down and wrote the music that I wanted to hear right now."
That's fucking magnificent.
Mm-hmm.
That is the type of spirit that I would love to see in any creative sphere.
Yeah.
Whether it's music or otherwise. And if I'm gonna say it, what he just described there, the way that he said that in that interview, that is outright the spirit of punk. Even if he's not actually writing music within the quote unquote boundaries of the punk genre, which that's an oxymoron in my mind, but okay. But the spirit of what he said there, that's punk.
Yeah.
I want to do something that expresses what the band likes. It doesn't matter that it's not the same shit we've been making for 20 years. If everybody likes the music, it's an Opeth record. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is outright the spirit of punk.
And in that same interview, it was talked about how they had written a couple songs, but it felt too much like what they did before, so they blew the whole thing up and started fresh.
Hey,
Because Ackerfeld wasn't the only one who felt that they were kind of getting sick of what they were doing up to that point.
yeah, it felt like they were getting pigeonholed.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
I like that.
even the even when it comes to the album art, between the two albums, kind of shows a difference.
Yeah.
I should note that they're already dipping into other styles even before that. The album before that was Deliverance, which was 2002. There was Deliverance in 2002, Damnation. Actually, let me. I have to double check, and this is the tricky thing when dealing with this kind of thing. But they had been slowly dipping into progressive styles for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that with Heritage, they decided to go all the way into it. The album that they did before that was Watershed, and that was the last time they used any sort of death sounds, and just I'm going to share with you two images. These being the cover arts for Watershed and for Heritage, and what I will consider just how vastly different the two of them are.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, yeah, in between that there was the concert at the Royal Albert Hall, but I don't count that. although with that one they did their own little nod to the concerto for group and orchestra that Deep Purple had done back in '69,
Mhm.
which is a nice little touch. And there were a, there was a gap of a few years. Watershed came out in 2008, and Heritage, as I said before, in 2011.
Mhm.
And that's more or less that more progressive style is what they've stuck to um, ever since.
Mhm.
Because there's been three more albums since. The most recent one being In Counta Venenum, which is continuing that particular visual style.
Yeah.
And so I've seen some argue that it was somehow a betrayal of their fan base to do this, but I look at that as one of those parasocial things, and I think if you're taking that approach, then you have more of a connection to a specific genre than the people within it.
Yes.
Um,
And you're also associating it far too much with some sort of identity.
yeah, there's
This
a
ties
reason I
back
like.
into.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was gonna say this ties back into one of our maxims here in the monastery: fans, not fandom.
Hmm. Um, I do remember somebody tried to see if they could catch me in a gotcha by saying, well, what if a VTuber you followed all of a sudden started doing death metal? I'd be like, um, I can already think of one who'd be a perfect fit.
Zephyriana. I follow a VTuber named Zephyriana. She does death metal vocals.
Yeah, I was, I was, but I think you know who I was really gonna go with.
The cutting board. I knew exactly who you were going for, especially death metal. The cutting board monk.
Yeah.
But I was going to point out someone who I think needs way more people to follow her. All of you out there, you want to hear a fantastic death metal vocalist who also happens to be a VTuber? Zephyriana. Go look her up.
Put the link in council so I can take a look at that later.
I will do so.
But that given the fact that most of the time when you have singing projects with VTubers, it is a giant jukebox.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an issue that's going to come up, and I think. And if I'm being honest, I've seen some people end up getting burned out on doing music simply because they felt they got stuck in a rut.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, which is the reason why some folk would consider venturing out into other territories. That's just something that's going to happen when it comes to creatives. I'm not going to say that I'm on the same level as some of the people we're talking about, but I have made no bones about being a little tired of the Western European fantasy pastiche.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, not just in terms of role playing games, but just in general.
Yeah.
And I remember when even if he has his issues that we've clowned on him about these days, American McGee doing something like Alice, because he outright admitted he was getting sick of doing sci-fi Marines.
Mm-hmm.
Along with a few others. I know that there's that alleged claim that somebody gave him bad level advice, which was why he got ran out of it. I think he just got sick of all the bullshit that happened with Quake 2.
That's much more likely.
Because Quake 2 is not a bad game, but it is the definition of meh.
Mm.
Like there's nothing bad about it, but I'd hesitate to say there's anything good about it either.
It is what it is, essentially.
But there's a whole lot of stories that came out of how the development of Quake 2 was such a shit show that a lot of people ended up running out.
Mm.
Though to be fair, I look at that as more of the camel's back was already starting to break because of all the shit that happened with Quake.
Mm.
But the idea of wanting to shift into other mediums is not as unheard of as people think it is. Even now, granted, there is the whole thing with actors, but I think in those kind of situations, it gets a little bit more complicated when you have an actor who's known for playing a certain character. And yes, I'm bringing Harrison Ford into this with the fact that he probably was gung ho about playing a more broken down character with any to flex his acting chops.
Mm.
The problem is doing that with that particular character is a terrible idea. Um, largely because there isn't really a foundation for that. And I know some people will say, but what about Old Man Logan? That was already in the comics, and it's already been established that Logan is old.
Yep.
Now, as far as how old, that varies. There were some stories that imply that he knew and Saba Nur back in the days of ancient Egypt. Some that he was around in the colonial days of Canada.
Mm.
But the point is, he's been around a while. So doing the old man thing was not that much of a stretch. It's important to understand what you can and can't do with a given character. Can you do just about anything with a given character? Yes. You can't do everything, though. And just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
Now, of course, sometimes you have issues because of the powers that be. And a perfect example of this is Falling into Infinity by Dream Theater, which was poorly received early on, but has gotten something of a reevaluation. Though, unlike with some of the others, Falling into Infinity has a few asterisks involved.
Mm-hmm.
Namely because there were, and this is something that's been covered extensively. There was a lot of studio interference, and because of that, there were more songs that ended up on the cutting room floor that are now available thanks to the bootleg collection, as well, and more recently the Lost Not Forgotten archives, which was all Labrie's idea.
Labrie saving us once again.
Well, when there was the contention regarding the file sharing thing, each member of Dream Theater had a different take, which I think is more refreshing than a whole band having one take on the matter.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even a binary. Labrie had had stated how it would be hypocritical of him to get on that, given the library, and I'm not understating that, library of bootleg concerts that he collected ever since he was a kid, to the point where he cut out the middleman and made official bootlegs of his own concerts.
Hmm.
I don't remember how Portnoy felt about it. I think either Petrucci or Myung had the mindset of they'd rather people focus on the actual show than focus on their cell phones.
Hmm.
But and some of the interference was due to the fact that this came out after Awake, which I've seen way too many people treat Awake the same way as certain assholes treat Final Fantasy VI, as if that was the perfect thing and nothing they've done ever since has been as good.
Hmm.
Um, but Dream Theater's only mainstream hit was Pull Me Under,
Um. Yeah, I can agree with that statement.
which was off of Images and Words, which Images and Words is technically their second album, but it's it's more accurate I look at Images and Words as where Dream Theater started, the same way I've said Dragon Quest as we know it started with 3.
Hmm.
But but Pulled Me Under was the only time they had a outright mainstream hit.
Hmm.
Something that they've made, that when they did a compilation a few years back, it made fun of, like, by putting out an album called Greatest Hit and 27 Other Cool Songs.
Hmm. And I remember when we were first discussing this episode, actually, and you brought up Falling into Infinity, you gave me a buy or sell. You Not Me from the actual album, or the demo version You or Me.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to both songs back to back just so I could do a proper comparison, because I've heard You Not Me before, having, well, been a Dream Theater fan for a long time. And I listened to the two, and I'm like, buy You or Me, sell You Not Me. There were elements in You or Me that felt organic, I guess, for lack of a better term. It felt like something the band actually wanted to make. Whereas You Not Me very much feels like there's some production interference in it.
There definitely was, because
Again, the album, yeah.
at this time, they're under the management of East West, and there were some management shifts, and the new people running things were specifically looking for radio singles, and apparently they had this attitude that Dream Theater was a one hit wonder. Which I realize
Well, that's a good joke.
Mhm. Because keep in mind that before this was a change of seasons, which um is is labeled an EP, but it's a little bit long for an EP.
Just a tad.
Mm-hmm.
Just a tad. I mean,
Oh,
I think, if we're going to be honest here, though, Monk, with Dream Theater definitely holding to some of their prog rock roots in a lot of the things they do, making an EP, cutting an EP for them can be challenging at times.
Portnoy at the time, with a change of seasons, had said it was important for us in the label that it not be perceived as the latest studio record,
Mm-hmm.
which is understandable, because because of the fact that that obviously you have the 23-minute track, but you have you have some live covers that were at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club.
Yep.
Not exactly a whole lot of studio stuff,
Yeah.
but and that was in '95. So, and Falling into Infinity was 2 years later. Apparently, the original plan was to do a double album project, which was certainly going to be ambitious. And in a roundabout way, I'd say we eventually did get that with 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence.
Hmm.
In terms of that's what immediately comes to mind when I hear Dream Theater and double album in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Um, but they had one of the things they had also planned, which we would end up getting eventually, just not yet, was a sequel to Metropolis Part One.
Hmm.
Now, originally Part Two was just going to be one song, but then with time that expanded into Scenes from a Memory, which oddly enough was my was my introduction to Dream Theater.
I actually cannot remember my introduction to Dream Theater. I
Hmm.
do, however, remember my reminder that Dream Theater still existed, and that was probably when Pull Me Under was put on a I think it was Rock Band.
Prob- prob- Probably because there was that whole thing with the Rock Band Network.
Hmm. I remember, was it Rock Band? I can't remember if it was Rock Band or Guitar Hero. Might have been
It
in
was
Guitar
probably
Hero.
Rock Band because Guitar Hero didn't have a network of downloadable songs.
Let me see here. It was the final unlockable song in Guitar Hero World Tour.
Which I only played World Tour like once.
Hmm. Um, it was played through on the ending credits of World Tour, which I remember. Um, but I think it was when, yeah, Guitar Hero World Tour, yeah, 2008. That's when I was reminded that Dream Theater still exists. I'm like, holy shit, really?
Hmm.
And I felt bad because I felt like I should have been listening to more of their stuff. I was like, now I have to go catch up.
Yeah, and for a lot of the unfinished stuff and a lot of the demos and the like have been collected in the Lost Not Forgotten archives.
Hmm.
Um, but and several songs that were going to be on Falling into Infinity are in those archives. It has it's most of the stuff that's in the archives is just demo versions of stuff that was eventually put onto the track, or in the case of the archives for When Dream and Day Unite, it's a bunch of little demos and little gags like the what one of the funnier ones, which was the Mike thinks he's Dee Dee from the Ramones song. You know, these little gags that they put in that are all less than a minute.
Hmm.
Uh, let me see if I can let me see if I can find it because uh, it was basically a bunch of the demos that were done when they were still Majesty.
Hmm.
So
There
you
was
had
a remaster and reissue of the Majesty demos in 2022.
hmm so you things like the anti-procrastination song, the I'm about to faint song, the solar system race song, the John thinks he's Randy song, the Mike thinks he's Dee Ramone introducing a song, the John thinks he's Ingwe song.
You have the backwards song, or as it's actually named, Gnas Jugrakab.
Which might sound ridiculous, but let's keep in mind that a lot of these are put under the label Yeats Jam Records.
Mm-hmm.
Majesty spelled backwards.
Yep. But the songs that we've been pointing out are literally like the anti-procrastination song, 13 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Mike thinks he's Dee Dee Ramone introducing a song, 16 seconds. Backwards song, 23 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Like these joke songs are not even just less than a minute; they're less than half a minute.
Yeah,
and they're great too. They're hilarious.
But I'd say one of the bigger ones that came out of the lost ones from Falling into Infinity was "Raise the Knife," which I can see how a record label that was looking for radio singles, even though Dream Theater kept saying to the execs, "We're not that kind of band," would take issue because "Raise the Knife" is 11.5 minutes.
Of course.
Which it and that's one of a handful. There was also the issue that East West had forced them to work with songwriter Desmond Child, who was more of a pop songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, Petrucci got singled out with him, which was how you got "You or Me" transforming into "You, Not Me."
Mm-hmm.
I think because of the fact that they did not want to work with Child.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was written by Petrucci and Child, and I think it was more the issue of bringing somebody else in to work on their music, because things had gotten so bad both externally and internally that that was one of the instances where Portnoy almost quit.
Yep. And Portnoy has almost quit quite a few times before he finally did take a break for his own self.
Though I have to put an asterisk on this kind of situation because of the elephant in the room when we're dealing with Portnoy, and especially during this time period.
Ah, yes, the time period where he was composing all of those nice 12-step suite songs.
He hadn't made the 12-step suite yet.
He was composing them in his head, though. Like he even said that he had been planning those for a while.
Yeah, but it's not exactly a secret that his drinking had gotten out of control.
Yeah.
In fact, unfortunately, it's not around anymore. But there was a really, really good supercut of the 12-step suite that was intercut with interviews he had done over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And even Portnoy himself commented on the video and really liked it. But unfortunately, the video's gone.
And that's probably not Dream Theater's fault, but instead the fault of the fucking music record companies. Thank you, UMG, for existing and being a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm. But and as far as speaking of assholes when it comes to the album, the reason why the font is different, that's Storm Thorgerson's problem. He refused to use a font designed by another artist.
Yeah.
But even eventually the eventually stuff like the unfinished Metropolis Part 2 project did find their way online.
Mhm.
Although he still feels that it was a bit incomplete. Incomplete and sloppy were the words that were used. And the thing is that there obviously getting screwed by the label is nothing new. This is an interesting story because it's a case of I look at this as I look at this with the following analogy: the people who insist on things being done a certain way would be the equivalent of East West Records in this particular story. Trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, they were trying to fit a band like Dream Theater, who their preferred way of doing songs lended itself to a very long form song style, and trying to force them to become radio sound bites.
Where radios get ra- radio programs get triggered if you have a song more than 5 minutes.
That's just because the radio is stupid.
Mm-hmm. Even the well, I seem to recall that there was a lot of fighting regarding putting Bohemian Rhapsody on radio because of how long that song is. Yet, if a classic rock station didn't have that, people would cry foul today.
Yep.
And speaking of that, if I will use a Queen example of something that was divisive early on, but ended up ended up getting a much better reception with time. Probably jazz, as in obviously the album, not the musical genre.
I mean, jazz tends to be pretty divisive no matter who you talk to, Monk, as a musical genre. So, I guess that could be related tangentially, but I digress.
Well, I had at one point thought of doing a horror movie night and having people watch Whiplash.
I could see it.
I know some people like Whiplash isn't a horror movie. um, Not if you've never been in a band, it isn't. Plus, there's something amusing about seeing a abusive J.K. Simmons.
Isn't that half of J.K. Simmons' roles?
Either abusive or crazy.
Yeah.
Maybe. But when the reason why I gave it the title "Real Music and Exercise in Irony" is a lot of times when people talk about do the whole real music thing they is more about themselves than about the music that they claim to love.
Yep. It boils down to elitism. They are being elite about what type of music they consume.
And I know that I've to a point defended gatekeeping, but there are some forms of gatekeeping that I will not defend. One of those is people looking down on somebody asking quote unquote dumb questions.
Oh, you're a fan of XYZ? Name 10 of their songs.
The black metal crowd is one of the big offenders. Where if you have music that sounds pleasant, they will treat you as unmetal.
Man, I feel bad for them.
They also really, really hate power metal.
I feel bad for them. Missing out on so much good music.
Of course, people missing out because of wanting to stick to a security blanket is nothing new.
We have called out many Linuses on our GeekWatch and Valley and every other podcast we do.
Mm-hmm. But when it comes when it comes to like, I remember you've probably seen the movie High Fidelity way too many times, as much as I did. A lot of the record store situations are not as much of an exaggeration as somebody might think. We all knew that one guy who was the rock snob.
Mm-hmm.
Some people were that guy. Don't try and hide it from me.
I don't think I was ever the rock snob. I
No,
think
you weren't, but you probably knew people who were.
Yes, and I'd slap them in the face with music that they thought was rock, and I'd be like, "Is it rock, or is it something else entirely?" And then I'd point out that it was J-rock, which they hate. They claimed to hate.
I remember.
It's not rock unless it's not rock if it's from Japan. Those pansies. I literally heard that line twice in my life.
Oh, they should be thankful I wasn't there.
You didn't need to be there, Monk. I just laughed at them and walked away.
Mm-hmm. But especially since it's hard for anybody. It's hard for me to take seriously anybody using the pansy argument when DRN Gray exists, who were very much pushing the envelope in all aspects.
Urine Gray is so good. Oh my god.
Though it does amuse me that they got the Marilyn Manson comparison when I think one of the guys had outright said they don't even like Marilyn Manson.
That I vaguely remember that, but I'm not going to claim that that's factual because it might have been mimetic mutation over time.
It was in I think it was an interview that I think BBC had done years ago, and I only found out about it because of a YouTube clip in the early days of YouTube. But
this is why I would make no claim of factual basis, because it's lost to the annals of time.
They didn't say that they have some outright hostility towards him, but more that
we just don't care.
We don't care, and he was not an influence on us.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to get I would actually say, given the style that they were doing before they went into a more black metal approach post Mr. Newsman,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that they much like so many others were taking notes from X Japan. Though saying somebody is influenced by X Japan is a case of, do you have any idea how little that narrows it down?
Considering X Japan is one of the few pioneers of Visual K, yeah. And a lot of other things in that scene.
And the fact that their influence still has a ripple effect to this day.
Absolutely.
I mean, Yoshiki's still doing stuff.
Yosuke's still doing stuff. So is Toshi.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, they still get together to sometimes do stuff, even to this day now. Ever since they reunited.
Mm-hmm.
So, true. Or no, it wasn't Toshi, was it? Was it Toshi? Was I thinking Toshi, or was I thinking someone else? I feel like I was thinking Toshi.
Yeah.
Or is Toshi one of the people I'm thinking of because they're dead? I don't remember, Monk! My brain!
But and even I know a lot of people say Falling into Infinity was the transfer point between the old and new style. I'd say a bigger transfer point between these stylistic changes with Dream Theater was 6 degrees of inner turbulence,
I can see that.
which hey, by that point they finally got to do that double album they wanted to do for so long.
Hmm.
But of course that then you have we mentioned before, but there's always the folk who seem to do whatever they feel like doing.
Yep.
But they've kind of established that little fact pretty early on. If I had to name one big example of that kind of thing, Devin Townsend.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, what kind of music does Devin Townsend play? Yes.
You know, Monk, I feel stupid. We've been talking primarily metal this entire time about divisiveness due to changes, and we still haven't brought up probably one of the biggest household names, Metallica.
Yeah, I mean, I did fall out of favor with Metallica as time went on, but a lot of people seem to have this idea that they should have stuck to the same sound that they were sticking to that they were doing.
Pre-Black Album.
Yeah, pre Black Album.
Like that those are the two biggest groups I hear when it comes to the division is pre-Black Album, post-Black Album. And then you have someone like me who's like, I like everything except for maybe Saint Anger. That album was kind of shite. Death Magnetic was actually pretty fucking good.
Yes.
I'm not gonna lie.
The only thing that I distinctly remember from Saint Anger was them using a lot of trash can drumming, a lot of steel drumming, which felt like they were trying way too hard to sound like Slipknot.
I just felt like it was, like, again, referring to what I felt with Falling into Infinity, I felt like it was overproduced and not as organic as some of their other music had been.
I could certainly see that. And in all fairness, they had been with somebody like with a group like Metallica. I honestly think the whole Napster debacle ended up causing damage that they've only recently been able to recover from.
I actually think they redeemed themselves from the Napster debacle when they released Death Magnetic digitally. I think in some cases for free. And they're like, nah, man, this gets their music out there, and then more people are likely to buy it. And, like, they basically said, we were fucking wrong about Napster. Shit.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, you see, sometimes you learn. Digital distribution, even if it's done for free, can get you better sales. And they legit tracked it, and they were like, we got way better sales because of this. So,
you know what I find funny about that attitude? What they were doing with that is not far removed from the free issue 0 thing that's been a thing in comics for decades.
Yeah. I felt like bringing up Metallica was a good thing because Metallica, like I said, it's a household name. And yes, I know that there are going to be some of the elitists that were already fucking castigating here that are going to go, oh, Metallica, casual shit. I'm going to be like, buddy, everybody's got to have a first band somewhere. Eat it.
Plus, when it comes to the whenever it comes to the whole casual thing, I usually go, you look around for obscure bands so you can boast about how hipster you are. I look for obscure bands because I like treasure hunting. We are not the same.
Exactly. You look for obscure bands for clout. I look for obscure bands because I need more music. We are not the same. And if you try to say anything about it, well, I'll meet you in the mosh pit. 6'6", big heavy set guy. I think you could do a few broken ribs. My elbows are pretty sharp.
Yeah. But one other big example I always use when it comes to shifting styles constantly is Psy.
Absolutely.
Now,
Holy shit.
early on, they were as standard black metal as it gets.
Early on, yeah, that's how they established.
Like and I'm saying the very first album feels like very standard black metal compared to what they would do later. The next three albums is where they start to they're still doing largely black metal, but they're starting to mess around with the idea.
The way I always saw it is,
And then going full bore with Imaginary Sonicscape.
yeah, the way I see it with Psy is, they were black metal fans. They loved black metal, and they decided they wanted to try their hand in it. And they tried their hand in it and thought it was really cool. And then they were like, "How do we make this ours?"
Yeah, well, it's well known they were the first non-European black metal act to get any sort of signing.
Yeah.
It is unfortunate that they've had this issue of jumping around between labels since day one, because the first one that they were signed to was the same one that was fronted by Mayhem, which, if you know the Varg story, you know where that ended.
Oh, Varg. That man is insane.
Yeah. Even worse when somebody sent me the RPG that he made once. I will not review that. Not out of some moral turpitude, but because it is fucking nuts. And it's treated like a joke alongside Rahowa.
This isn't even a case where in his rating he would say avoid. This goes up on the shelf, like you said, next to Rahowa and Fatal.
Yeah.
This isn't avoid. This is toxic sludge. Don't touch.
Well, the level below avoid is I refuse.
It's not even an official ranking.
Mm-hmm. And but out of the frying pan into the fire, after that they ended up getting stuck with Cacophonous, the biggest cheapskates in metal.
Yeah. Not a lot of luck in those first few labels, was there?
I'd say it wasn't until they jumped onto Century Media, which is where we get Imaginary Sonicscape, that they started to get some degree of stability, until they ended up jumping from them to Candlelight to the End to I don't even know where they are label wise now, and they just put out an album last year.
Well, at least they're still putting out music, though. They love the music too much to let that shit hold them back.
Because okay, I have to correct myself, because the most recent thing that they put out was a live compilation called The Eastern Forces of Evil. But last year was Shiki, which feels like a spiritual successor to Infidel Art.
Mm-hmm. Looks like they're currently with maybe Peaceville.
Yeah, Peaceville Records. Never heard of them.
I don't know.
I do remember there was a bit of controversy with Graveward back in 2015 because some people really didn't like the way it was, the way it was produced. But given that album felt like it was trying to be very 70s. I think it was produced its sound was mixed the way it was by design rather than because somebody was too cheap.
Mhm.
But like consider how with imaginary Sonicscape they ended up you have them jumping between a bunch of different genres, sometimes jumping genres in the same song, like going metal and then all of a sudden having a interlude that's going full disco.
That's fine by me.
Um, there, I'd say the only time where there actually was there actually was an issue of mixing was Gallows Gallery, but I love how they tried to downplay it by saying that they had to make it that bad because they were using they were using government audio torture techniques. Everybody knew it was bullshit, but it had more to do with the fact that the guy who was mixing the thing was an amateur.
Mhm. I just I love the fact that I love the fact that that the Gallows Gallery is one of the is probably another one of those metals or one of those albums that was like, yeah, this isn't black metal either, and Psy was like, yeah, so. I think my favorite thing in an interview that Mirai said was with Terrorizer was, some people say that our late stuff sounds happy, but I've never ever had the intention to express happy feelings in any way. My motivation as a musician is always negative things. I can't write any happy songs, probably because I'm a negative person to the bone. I know Gallows Gallery and Imaginary Sonicscape contain some different feelings, but still they are all based on my negative feelings. I just use other techniques to express it, like using even major keys. And then he said also that that Gallows Gallery was not a concept album, but that musically each song is connected with the same or similar chord progressions and melodies, producing a certain continuity.
Though, you know how we talked about the downside of expectations.
Yeah.
Even with all the bullshit, the reason why they departed from Century Media was disappointed that they didn't do black metal. They didn't do straight black metal, which I would be willing to buy that if this was like their sophomore album, like the issue that happened with Weezer. But that wasn't the case here.
This is like what their fifth album, and technically the sixth or seventh, no, the seventh piece in their continuing discography pattern of spelling out Psy with the first letter of every title.
Yeah, they do that.
Yep. The only one that isn't a studio album that had to be mixed into the series was Ghastly Funeral Theater.
Mm-hmm. But this is it. The reason I find the idea of it being ridiculous is it's not like it was unknown the fact that they were by this point they were less black metal and more full on experimental.
Mm-hmm. I mean, some of the things that they're quote unquote billed as on their on many different places is avant-garde. It's like, that's just buzzwords for I don't know how to define this. I think experimental is a much better way.
Yeah, I've never been fond of using the term avant-garde as a genre because for starters, it's kind of pretentious, but also, and I've made this clear. I feel that whenever you're defining what is it within a genre, it should be it should be something specific and something consistent. That's the reason why I keep clowning on the phrase JRPG.
We've been over that one ad nauseum at this point.
Yeah, but since people keep using the term, I'm going to keep clowning on it.
That's fine. We'll continue to clown on it till the days are done.
Mm-hmm. But like when it comes, avant-garde is based on the word vanguard. All the vanguard, of course, being the front of the front lines.
The front runners.
Yeah.
The pioneers. That's essentially all it's saying. The pioneers of a new genre. Or the pioneers of a new sound. Which is enough to tell you nothing. All it does is pioneering a new sound in the metal genre. Okay. What's the new sound? At least experimental metal lets you know that what they're pioneering is playing around with the idea of metal itself.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fantastic. I love that.
Truth be told, the quote that we mentioned earlier with Opeth, I think I'm going to use that more often the next time I get into one of those scuffles regarding Final Fantasy or other franchises.
With Final Fantasy, we have used a quote equivalent to that. Where Sakamoto, or excuse me, brain Sakaguchi. Yes, I know. I said the wrong thing at the wrong time. Sakaguchi and Kitase have both said that Final Fantasy is whatever the best game and story the director at that time thinks it is, or that it isn't bound to any one media type. Mm-hmm. We have already used a similar quote to the Opeth quote about if the whole band likes the sound, then that's an Opeth record. It exists. We've used it. People just ignore it because it doesn't suit their ideals.
It doesn't suit the narrative.
Yeah. But with I think with everything that we've explored at this point, Monk, we probably have a good coda.
Yeah. What would you say the coda is when it comes to this particular exercise in irony?
That in the end, real music comes from the band, from the people making it. And that whatever expectations you may have, or whatever interferences that studios and record labels may put on them, the real music still comes from the band. Once again, owing to the Opeth quote, if the band creates something and they all like it, that's the band's music. Mm-hmm. So the irony is, there is no one real music. You can't just say this is the real music, because the real music is what the band wants to create, whoever they might be.
I will also point out that the other irony is demanding conformity in a medium that is in a medium that is all about self-expression.
I'm going to say this now, Monk. That's a bit of a tautology, because any media should be about some amount of self-expression. Whether that's writing, whether that's music, whether that's games, whether that's painting, whether that's anything. Any media should have some form of self-expression entwined in it.
Yeah, it is a bit of a tautology, but for me it's more of a continuation of something I've discussed in the past, and that is a certain irony of people who claim to be geeks wanting conformity.
You know what? That is an irony, because shall I remind the class that geekdom and nerddom were an ultimate outsider for the longest time. You couldn't conform because nobody wanted you there, because it's perceived as outside social mores, or outside the perceived structure of what makes a good social connection.
Mm-hmm.
And it is only very recently, with the commoditization of what makes nerds and geeks, that allowed for at least the words to be used in a socially positive way. But make no mistake, the people who go, "Oh, I'm such a nerd about things," are posers. And yes, that does sound like gatekeeping. And you know what? In this case, it is. Nerddom, geekdom, once again, another form of self-expression and passion. And the people who think that being a nerd is a cool thing to be, or being a geek is a cool thing to be, are simply following a commoditized and packaged idea of what nerds and geeks actually are, that is a conformist one. When being a nerd or geek is not about conformity. And this is where I have to plug just a little bit the anime Magical Girls Magical Destroyers. Yes, technically it's a 12-episode advertisement for a mobile game that's coming out soon, but the ideas within the anime are still good. Being a nerd, being a geek, being an otaku, being anyone who self-expresses wherever you might be, whoever you are, is about saying that you like the things you like as much as you want to say it to whomever wants to hear you. And that's what GeekWatch has been all about.
Yeah. And incidentally, we here in the temple are not going to dismiss an anime just for being tied to a mobile game.
True.
Because remember, we loved Seven Nights, and that is tied to a mobile game. By the thinnest of margins, but still.
Yes. And I'll be honest, Magical Destroyers is tied to the brainchild of a guy who was throwing up this art on the internet for a much longer time and on conventions, and then finally got a break with an anime studio. And what really... The reason I say it's an ad for the mobile game is it ends on a cliffhanger that makes it look like you're going to be playing a gacha system. And it doesn't, and we have heard no news about a potential season 2. Mm-hmm. But that's all rails. The real music is tangential to what it means to be a nonconformist geek, a nonconformist nerd, whatever you want to call it, whatever the name is. Self-expression. And the idea that you have something you want to put out there and express yourself about, that's the important part here. That's what breaks the ironic musings of the conformists. That we have a thing we like, we're going to talk about what we like to whoever wants to hear it as much as we like.
Pretty much. And I'd say that's as strong of a coda as we will get for this week. So that's going to do it for this particular episode of GeekWatch. We will hopefully be back here tomorrow for the Parliament of Geeks, covering something that is going to be very interesting for us. And I will be I don't have a whole lot of interviews this week. In fact, I only have one. Thursday and Friday will be the return of the Valley of the Judged. Thursday with Monarch and Friday with Xanatrix. And next Sunday will, of course, be the triumphant return of GeekWatch. So please look forward to all of that. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.